to Reading the Revolution. My name is Marielis. I am in Norway, an American, and I am reading books that you need to know if you are going to be part of the or a revolution. And we are currently reading Neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah. We are in chapter 13, but do not fret. In the beginning of every single stream, I go through notes of everything we've gone through up until yesterday. And you also have access to the notes if you go to our Discord, which you can find in the page description. I'm also restreaming today on YouTube. So welcome to YouTubers as well. Trying to see where the audience that wants to learn about what it takes to be the revolution are. And so we shall start. Okay, so the first thing I do, again, I go through the previous chapters. So we go straight to my notes. Okay, so the book that we're reading is Neocolonialism by Kwame Nkrumah, which was the basically the liberator of the Gold Coast, which is now Ghana. He was the president and also previously the prime minister. We learned in the intro that neocolonialism is way worse than the imperialism and the colonialism that predates it. Because there's a lack of responsibility with neocolonialism that you do get with the colonies. Because during the colonies, you had to go back and tell what it is that you're doing, why, what is the conditions, With neocolonialism, you don't have to do any of that. It's basically capitalism in its worst form. And these are the ways that it infiltrates the governments of these newly forming countries through financial agreements, implanting politicians, military pretenses. The example of the book is Africa, although there obviously has been, I'm sure you know, other colonies. But what we learn right away is that Africa has not changed since the book was published. So we have not seen, basically any change. And again, I'm not going to go through absolutely everything on the notes because this is 19 pages, 13 chapters. So we're not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and give the summary of everything that we've learned. So in chapter 3, we learned about what are the main obstacles that these African nations are facing. First thing is during their colonialism stage, they were divided into a lot of small countries, a lot of small states, easier to control, divide and conquer. Then, as new countries, they were in need of financing. So then there is the lending and the monopolies that go in and take over the industries. So those are basically the two other things: the financing and the monopolies. And then in chapter 4, we go deeper into imperialism or imperialist finance, which, Lenin said imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Well, now imperial finance is the highest stage of neocolonialism. And we find out what that means. Basically, we just have a lot of mergers, amalgamations, contracts, syndicates, cartels of companies that come together and basically decide on the rules of the game and how they're going to be exploiting these countries so that the countries have very little way to maneuver themselves out of it. The U.S. comes in and dominates basically after World War II, taking over a lot of the loans from the European countries. So we have a whole section there, a lot of notes on how that developed, and then to today. So as I read the book, I go back and in my notes, or when I do my notes, I go back and give us information about where we are today. Okay, they start infiltrating the educational system and the culture, and propaganda also starts. So, because once you take over everything, you keep people in poverty, you have to give them a dose of propaganda. Otherwise, you might fail. Okay, then we have chapter 5, monopoly capitalism and American dollar. So we dive deeper into that aspect, which we kind of highlighted just now. But basically, we are, besides everything that they're doing, growing, eating up other companies, and controlling every aspect of the economies of these newly formed countries. They also make sure that we are all propagandized properly and we cherish the system. So we cherish the capitalistic monopoly. So they had their campaigns. So here I talk about how they go into every aspect of industry. So they're basically controlling not just the raw materials that they're extracting, but they're controlling every aspect of that. But also in the developing country, they also go into the areas where they need. So they would sell them the chemicals that they need to spray the crops. For example, they would do the roads, the trains if there's a need for that. Basically, every aspect of the interest, the schools, the hospitals, as well as everything that it takes to get the food. So they're controlling everything. And this is not just controlling it from a humanitarian point of view, because a lot of these things sound like that. These are capitalists that are going in there to extract. And that's why the countries continue to stay poor. They work together, all the national banks with the World Banks, with the World Bank, work together to, to keep the system in place, because this is where they get their highest profits. Chapter 6 talks about propaganda, the truth behind the headlines. So Kwame tells us that the stories that are printed, he actually goes through several stories, and then he tells us what is actually behind it. In this example, he tells us how the company here took over or gave the French people more safety because it has more, basically more capital. But what it doesn't tell you is that it took over banks in 3 African countries. So now it controls all of the money in 3 countries. Okay, so a lot of details. Again, you want to go through those on your own. The banks create monopolies. They eat each other up. The capitalist countries also create monopolies. Then they need money to be able to continue to grow. The banks need to eat each other up, basically monopolize to be able to have the capital to provide these huge companies. So, and then they do investment. They invest into those companies. So therefore, the banks and the capitalists become one. So they just basically eat each other up, basically. So it's just one system. The companies and the banks, the insurance companies, the infrastructure companies, all of them are just one. Even when there are several, they do, basically sit in each other's boards. They invest in each other's. So it's really hard for you to, basically have different options, because they're all going to kind of trap you into whatever it is that they want you to do. Chapter 7 goes into the primary resources and foreign interest. They call it harmonized exploitation here, because they're working with the African countries. So here, when you hear about corrupt politicians, this is what they're talking about. They basically extract from the countries with permission, because they have those guys in their pocket. Then we have some opportunities that were pointed out, because these are areas where they're stockpiling for the war. They monopolize, and there's only a couple places where they can get the raw materials. So this is an opportunity as well. This is with manganese, for example. and phosphate in Morocco and that sort of thing. Things that they didn't take advantage of at the time. I don't know exactly where they are with that today. We focused a little bit on Gabon because it has an abundance of plenty minerals and natural resources, and it gives opportunity for the capitalist countries to have low cost on electricity and gives them quick growth opportunities. And we have an example of that here. But basically, they grow in power because of these extraction and these growth opportunities from these low cost and, dehumanizing and exploitation. So in this book, we learn a lot about these names that we are used to, the Morgan, Bank. We have the Oppenheimers. We have the Rhodes. We have the, just a bunch of names household names. And we know that most of them, if not all of them, got their riches, their power, and their prestige from exploitation right in this time period. Okay, we learned a little bit about some of the changes that Gabon has done in today's day. So they have made some improvements. They voted out a bootlicker dynasty in 2023. And they've made some changes since then, but still working within the French system. So not something that their people necessarily loves. Yes, so they have some meaningful moves that they did. Okay, so I just highlight here some of the points that I want to make. I just wanted to point out the phosphate from Gabon and the U.S. company, how they expand into different countries. Most of these capitalist companies that started in Africa exploiting had such a great opportunity to just move to all over the world, to different countries and different resources. So they just kept growing, kept getting fatter and fatter. And exploiting. Every now and then you have a new one that comes in, and they come in mainly because they find themselves in a situation where they made a bad investment and their shareholders are basically confronting them, and then they're like, well, then we can just go to Africa and just make a quick buck, easy profits. So that's what they do. We dive deeper in Chapter 8 to specifically the Oppenheimer Empire. They were known as the king of African mining. They were located in South Africa. Basically, every single company in South Africa had some relationship with the Oppenheimers. If they didn't sit in the board of the company, if they didn't own the company, they were affiliate subsidiaries or associates in some kind of way. So they had control over everything, and that's why they're called that. And you have details about how that is, why we decided that is how we want to look at them. Okay, we continue on, and it just breaks down a lot more of how these companies basically expand. And even when they contract, they only contract to expand even larger. So an example would be a mine that is dying. Well, then those companies will be bought out, and then they would exploit something else and then probably move to a different country. It is incredible how much detail this book goes into, and my notes also. So go to the Discord channel and get these notes so that you are informed about how things started, and therefore are not easily propagandized when the messaging is something different that they're giving you at this time. Okay, so Chapter 9, Foreign Investment in South African Mining. Okay, so we just dig a little bit deeper. British and Americans are the ones that are really taking over in South Africa. We have the Oppenheimers that basically are with the, actually they have their fingers in both the American and the British. But they start off with, I believe it's the British, and then De Beers. Oh no, De Beers is the American. Oppenheimer is the British. Okay. Anyways, the notes say it all. I'm just not going to be reading it fully at this moment. Because what we're going to try to do today is we're trying to get to the reading. So we're just going over some of these summaries and yeah, give me 1 second. Okay. So continuing, the Anglo-American Corporation Limited. So we focus on this particular company owned by the Oppenheimer group, and we kind of let us learn about how they have grown in power, how they get their fingers into policies, how they get their fingers into government. We are introduced to Mr. Rhodes in this chapter. He was a prime minister of Cape Colony in South Africa. And he wanted to get even more land, so he brought in some British miners to basically, start some sort of disagreement with the Dutch people that live there, so that he can take their land. Didn't work out for him, but anyways, he had ownership and associations with the De Beers companies and the Oppenheimer companies and Goldfields of South Africa and the British South African company. So that's all of those people. So they just basically what we learned up to this point is that there is no limitation to their growth. The book is basically going into such details, painfully details, because it wants us to know that they're everything that you think is a limitation, it is not for them. And we talk about the gold in this chapter. So here I just wanted to find out who owns the gold today. And it's basically no surprise. I didn't keep it a secret. It's the same companies and families that owned it back then in the 60s own it today. Under different names, because of course they just kind of like eat each other up. They, there's all the tentacles of the octopus all over the place. It's quite hard to follow in these notes. We do have some examples so that you can understand how it works. Though, because it's the 60s, these tentacles have changed names, have changed directions, have gone to different countries. I mean, they're all over the world. But what you see in Africa is that it's part of the machine. So in Africa, they are able to get these high margins, which helps them grow their wealth enough to then go and eat up the rest of the world. So that's how that works. We go deeper into the diamond groups, and this is where we left off last week. Oh, not last week, sorry, yesterday. We do streaming every single day. Sorry about that. So this is where we left off yesterday with the diamond groups. When I go over what we read the previous day, I do it in a little bit more details. So the diamond group, important industry, no duty or import or export. In 1965, Oppenheimer and his conglomerate of companies controlled 85% of the world's diamonds, even controlling those that came from Russia. They not only owned the mining, but also the distribution companies. The main companies I name here, and owned and ran by the Oppenheimer and Rhodes. De Beers has 50% investment in African explosive and chemical industries, owned because they use it for mines, and then they expend it. So basically, they bought this explosive company so that they can, do the explosive for their mines. But then they were like, hey, why would we limit ourselves just to our mines? We can expand and do other things. So that's what they did. Okay, so then you have the ICI, Imperial Chemical Industry, rose from this. So this is a company that they created. It became a cartel of chemical production along with De Beers and other similar companies and monopolized the chemical industry. It became associated with I.E. DuPont for the production of military equipment. DuPont grew because of this relationship, bought more than half of General Motors stock. So this is what kept General Motors alive. Was explosive and military equipment. You would be surprised how many. We have car companies that we had in our examples, several actually, that basically were kept alive through military, selling of military, basically expanding and making more destructive worlds. Eventually, and in certain countries, eventually, and in certain countries, DuPont and ICI decided to let go of the pretense of separation and did business as one. Okay, I see what I was trying to say there. Okay, so still, I don't think, and in some countries, that's good enough. Let's not forget that ICI is associated with the Oppenheimer companies, meaning they were all profiting from military equipment. Still, the explosive industry wouldn't have grown or happened without the diamond industry. So the diamond industry really did a lot because the slimes of the caves were a different mineral. They were used for something else. Then you have the explosive, and then you have the diamonds. So they actually really did a lot of growing for these companies. Okay, when the diamond company in Tanganyika was going under, here came De Beers to buy them out. The, at the time, name Tanganyika government also had some ownership of their diamonds and worked with De Beers in this. Then you have the French companies. So in a lot of our examples, we go through the French companies. They basically, most of them have the name Société in the beginning and then whatever it is, because there's so many of them and they just deviate and they're associated and they're holding companies and they're production companies and they're mining companies and they're, all over the place, industrial companies. And so they all kind of have the same name, not all of them, of course, but anyways, so we have this expansion of De Beers going in and buying out a company that was dying. The French came in as well, and what do they do? Then you have the French companies having ownership in the trading and distribution companies. There's a bunch of them with similar names. Oh, I definitely did break it up. But as we mentioned earlier, these companies have ownership in the mining and of other minerals. This is how they get into every raw material and industries, transport, commerce, etc., and how they all become associates of each other. In the process of expanding, they create new companies and divest interest in the older, more limited companies. Let's make sure to put in a E there so I don't stumble next time I read it. The French were also busy mining for diamonds in Congo and and they were also in agriculture and other industries, said to have the economy of Congo in their hands, and really wanted to expand over to Angola, where the Oppenheimers were sitting in the board of the Angola Diamond Company, along with other oil and mineral capitalists. So they're basically controlling one country, and they want to go and control more countries. Their partners basically sit in the board of the other countries' diamond exports, and the French have a lot of ins and out with the Oppenheimer companies as well. So this is one of them. Oppenheimer sits in the board of the diamond company, of the Angola Diamond Company, along with other oil and mineral capitalists. The Angola government also has some shares of the diamond company though it keeps it in Portugal. So this is one of those examples where the Angola government is quite corrupt, right? So it hoses money outside. It forces its population into forced labor. They get paid, but 7 times less than a person's supposed to. And also it helps the company not pay import-export duties. So you can only imagine if they actually even have to pay taxes. So that is, that's that government. Diamond Company grew into the Ivory Coast, now Côte d'Ivoire, expanded into Sierra Leone and Sierra Leone Trust, where this is one of those examples that kind of you get to cringe a little bit about how these companies behave. Okay, so they had a hard time with the people because they were fighting back because these companies were owning all of their resources. They had to sell shares back to the people, the government, but they left a bunch of loopholes. One of them is that the company had to be compensated for not owning 100% because of loss of opportunity. The other one being that that whenever the government sells a share, it has to present it first to the Sierra Leone Selection Trust first. Let's see. Still receives some whining. That's right. We read about this, I forget his name, but he was basically whining to the government, saying that with the government, with their shares and their side of the business where they're extracting and doing their thing, he's saying, well, you're using these ancillary or these other companies that are in competition with the companies that we use. So they're complaining about that. And when you look a little bit deeper, you realize that the companies that they do business with are just them, right? They own those companies. So it's this whole pyramid scheme that they have going on over there. The American oil capitalist, Sam Collins, also comes in. So he's into oil. He comes to West Africa. He starts a couple of companies, Marine Mining and Sea Diamond Company. And then the Oppenheimers were like, who you? What you doing? And so they buy a big chunk of their companies because competition is part of this whole thing. They don't want competition. They want to be able to price fix. They want to be able to have ownership and control. That's why this guy Oppenheimer sits on 70 boards of all of these different companies, because the purpose is control. It's not even money, really, because these people are super, super duper rich. Okay, and so now we are on chapter 12, and that is where we left off. Okay, so we will go into. So again, the way that we go, we read the summary, we go through it. The notes are in the Discord so that you can go through it in more detail. There's a lot of really good examples there. And then once we go through those notes, then we go into the actual reading. And so we're going to be doing some reading. We'll probably react to what we read. But that's what it is. We're on chapter 13, and we want to see what we can learn from this. All right. So give me one moment. Okay. So yeah, this is a reading channel. So just giving you guys a heads up. It's just going to be us reading and seeing what we gain from this neocolonialism and in Africa. Now we're looking at mining interests in Central Africa. So we've moved away from the diamonds and other resources, and we're going into just general mining in Central Africa. We were also in South Africa. We did do a little bit of some West Africa, actually, as well. Okay, mining interests in Central Africa. If we examine the intricacies of the Anglo-American extensions through the exploitation of Africa's raw materials, we find its strong arm holding down the wealth of Rhodesia, South Africa, and Southwest Africa, both through direct holding as well as through those of its American Engelhard and Connecticut Copper Associates and the British South African Company Ltd. This is basically is a summary of everything that we've read. So this is not a surprising paragraph. This is basically summarizing everything we've read. We know that Rhodesia is basically a stronghold, is in some type of chokehold, South Africa by the Oppenheimers. We have the Engelhard people. We have also the French in there as well that, they didn't mention just now. But let's continue. The British South African Company was a creation of Cecil Rhodes, genius in empire building, and he and his company is still alive and well. Or let's not call it his company. The conglomerate and monopolies and associates and holding companies and all of the octopus of Cecil Rhodes are alive and well. Some of them have different names, but his family, for example, owns a bunch of that shit still. Okay, watching this scramble for the lands in South Africa in the early 1890s, he decided that unless he got it in quickly, other European adventurers would take up large tracts of valuable country ruled by savage native chiefs in the interior of Africa. Using his notorious agents Rudd, Maguire, Rochford, and Thompson, war was provoked between the Mantabellas of what is now known as Rhodesia. It's not known as Rhodesia anymore. And their chief, Lo Benguela. Troops of the South African Company, which was granted a royal charter in 1889, went ostensibly to support of the chief against his people. This trick of Rhodes, described by certain historians as adroit handling, secured the company a concession to work mineral rights in the vast expanse of land that now forms the whole Rhodesia. Okay, so remember that he was a politician in South Africa, and he was kicked out because he set up a coup, basically, where he had these British people come to invade. Basically, well, they were miners, but they were not paid well, and then he made it so that they can have disputes and disagreements. He basically set it up so that there can be some type of like mini war takeover, and the British can come and be like, well, you're not handling your land very well, we're going to take it over. And this is not from African. This was from the Dutch. So he was trying to take land from the Dutch. Because it doesn't really matter who owns it. There was land there that had resources. It had diamonds, and he wanted to get at it. Or at least he wanted to go check to see if there's diamonds so that he can get at it. He was kicked out, and he sat in the board of a bunch of these companies that we had mentioned before. And so he was trying to expand those companies. So he was kicked out of there. He came to Rhodesia, and he started the same shit over here. Zimbabwe is what Rhodesia is called now. I had to look it up. I forgot. Okay. So that's what this guy is doing. When Lo Benguela woke up to the bitter realization of the trickery that had divested him and his people of the rights in their own land, he petitioned Queen Victoria as follows. Some time ago, a party of men came into my country, the principal one appearing to be a man named Rudd. They asked me for a place to dig gold and said they would give me certain things for the right to do so. I told them to bring what they would give, and I would then show them what I would give. Interesting. A document was written and presented to me for signature. I asked what it contained and was told that in it were my words and the words of these men. I put my hand on it. Oh, Lord. Does he not know how to read? Jesus Christ. About 3 months afterwards, I heard from other sources that I had given by that document the right of all the minerals of my country. I called a meeting of my indunas and also of the white man and demanded a copy of the document. It was proved to me that I had signed away the mineral rights of my whole country to the Rudd and his friends. I have since had a meeting of my indunas, and they will not recognize that paper, as it contains neither my words nor the words of those who got it. Okay. Very interesting. So this is a fucking scheme, basically trying to steal the whole country from its people by tricking a man to sign a paper. After the meeting, I demanded that the original document be returned to me. It has not come yet, although it is 2 months since, and they promised to bring it back soon. Then men of the party who were in my country at the time were told to remain until the document was brought back. One of them, McGuire, has now left without my knowledge and against my orders. I write to you that you may know the truth about this and may not be deceived. With renewed and cordial greetings, Lo Benguela. I mean, this is so sad that they so easily were able to, well, at least so far, were easily so able to take over the entire country. Who in those days gave back land filched by whatever means from savage native chiefs, and who today will give them back to the people from whom they were taken unless that people insist on their return by their determined and united will expressed by a union government. So basically they gave away their land, and Kwame is telling us they're not going to return it. And that's why we need to take the land back from every one of them, especially in South Africa. At least it's my opinion. At the close of the 19th century, Rose, dreaming of the Cape to Cairo Empire, pushed from Matabeleland into Mashonaland, across the Zambezi into the country now called Zambia. Thus, he drove a wedge between the Portuguese colonies of Mozambique and Angola. All this was done with the Buccaneers of his South African company, which had received 3 supplementary charters since the initial one was granted in 1889. Originally, the company had administrative rights over territory in southern Africa, lying to the north and west of the Transvaal and west of Portuguese East Africa. It also had rights to extend the Cape Railway and telegraph systems northward and to make concessions of mining, forests, or other rights, and much more besides. Its administrative and monopoly rights in northern and southern Rhodesia were ceded to the British government only as late as 1923-24. Mineral rights in the Rhodesia, however, were still retained, as well as a half interest for 40 years in the next proceeds of the disposal of the land in northwestern Rhodesia. In return, the British South African Company received a cash payment from the British government of 3.7 million euros. The commutation of its half interest in the proceeds of land disposal was made in 1956 for an annual payment of 50,000 euro for the remaining 8 years to run from 31st March 1957. Okay, so they still retained the land, or at least the mineral rights of the land. A cash purchase of the mineral rights was made by the Southern Rhodesian government in 1933 for $2 million, this time from African taxpayer money. This still left the company with its mineral rights in Northern Rhodesia, which by arrangement it is to enjoy until October 1st, 1986. However, since October 1st, 1949, it was paying the government of Northern Rhodesia 20% of the net revenue from these mineral rights, which sum was regarded as an expense for the purpose of Northern Rhodesia income tax. Furthermore, net revenue was defined as the profits of the company derived from its mineral rights calculated in the same manner as for the purpose of Northern Rhodesia income tax, i.e. after expenses had been charged against it. The arrangement provided for the imposition of mineral royalties as such in the Northern Rhodesia. While the Her Majesty government undertook to secure so far as possible that any government which became responsible during the 37-year period that is up to October 1st, 1986, for the administration of Northern Rhodesia should be bound to these arrangements. I mean, they still got the minerals. They still by this basically trick that they did. They got the minerals, and and they were able to enjoy, basically they were able to enjoy the exploits. Okay, the British South African Company, in spite of recent action taken by the government of Zambia to secure mineral rights, is still extremely powerful. It owns forests, agriculture, estates, and real property in Zambia, Rhodesia, and in Buchanland. It also has mineral rights in 16,000 square miles of Malawi territory. It formed Cecile Holdings Ltd. to acquire the whole share capital of British South African Company subsidiaries, with the exception of Rhodesia Railways Trust Ltd. Another formation, British South Africa Invested Ltd., acquired the greater part of the parent company's investment in 1958. Other subsidiaries include, and there's a list there. The British South African Company was divested of the greater part of its holdings in companies operating primarily in the Republic of South Africa by its participation in the 1961 exchange of shares with De Beers Investment Trust. It still remains its holding of 700,000 squares in Union Corporation Ltd. So it was eaten up by another of our friends. Alrighty then, let's continue. New Rhodesia investments include mining finance, gold, diamonds, coal, sundry companies, and December 1962, the market value of these holdings was put to 10.5 million euros, while Rhodesia investment net assets stood at 12.1 million. As for Anglo-American Corporation, its net assets at the end of 1961 were 114 million. The New Rhodesian important block of shares in Consolidated Mines Selection Trust Ltd. will be increased as a result of the current financial arrangement with Anglo-American. So these same companies that were in South Africa were then came to Rhodesia, owned a big percentage of all the minerals, and it all started with a fake contract. The complicated links between superficial, separate entities are shown by their investments in concerns of common interest. New Rhodesia major buyings into the Diamond Corporation, Johannesburg Consolidated Investment Company Ltd., and Rhodesian Anglo-American Ltd. tie up closely with the Anglo-American activities in the Rhodesia and in the Congo and Portuguese territories. These are the same companies. Like I said, this is from the Oppenheimer and Rhodes empires. All of these companies are just subsidiaries, and they're just devising their schemes to get more access to the resources, whether they have to buy it or they have to trick the government and the people to get it. Either way, the point is that they're going to get it. Johannesburg Consolidated is concerned primarily with diamonds, copper, gold, and platinum. Okay, so we still have the diamonds, gold, and copper. Platinum is seems to be specifically for the South African market. It also carries on prospecting operations. They're always looking for more mines whether it be in oil, gold, or diamonds, or anything else, really. So that's part of their operations. They want to be the first. They want to own more. They want to own it all, mainly in the South African and Rhodesia. Its subsidiary companies include, among others, and then we list them there. I'm not going to say them all. Some of these, as I look at them, some of these are new. But again, they're owned by the same parent company. So, what can you say? Okay. Johannesburg Consolidated last issue of shares was in 1957 when 600,000. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. We have looked at these companies today and seeing where they're at. They're still the same companies that had the power then. They still have them now. They still basically own everything, unless you have the governments, the small governments that are able to kick them out. But at least what we see now is we see some kicking them out from the French. I think, there was another country that kicked out the British. And basically is owning more of their, or at least a higher percentage of their raw materials. And hopefully this trend continues, because that is where Africa needs to go. Okay. Let's see what we can get from this paragraph. It seems like there's a lot of numbers. I tried to skip some of this, especially since this is the past. Rhodesia Anglo-American has large shareholdings in the leading copper mines in Rhodesia. These direct holdings are swallowed by those of companies in which it has interest. Yeah, okay. If that's the main point of that, then that is something that we have a lot of examples. Again, go to the notes. You'll see a lot of examples. I did used to in the other earlier chapters go into the details. I don't think it's necessary anymore, because basically they're just giving us examples of these companies. They're letting you know, if we read this book in 1965, then this would be shocking. We would know which companies to, basically run the country that we live in. If we live in an African country, we would know the companies that own, basically multiple countries in Africa. We were looking at it from the outside. And I think that is what Kwame wanted to let us know, that Africa has not been able to develop itself because these companies have been doing shit like this, doing these fake contracts, starting wars and taking over. They also get themselves into the education system, the religions, the propaganda stars. They start increasing dissent for the government. The people are poor and hungry or whatever, so they get upset with the government. Not knowing that the reason that they're in those shape is because they're put into situation with contracts where you have like 8 contracts where they can, they have limitations on what they can do with the money, or they have to not do certain things to be able to get the money. And then they just have predatory contracts where they sign them for a long period of time. Ghana is one of them. Nigeria is one of them, where they sign these contracts and basically they have to produce a certain amount of cocoa. This one of the examples from the notes of cocoa. And so the amount increases with time, with years, and you have to produce more, but you're not able to industrialize, right? And if you don't industrialize, then producing more is actually more costly because you need the machines, you need more people. If you can't industrialize, you can't get the machine. And then also the fertilizers that you dig up from your backyard are then taken somewhere else, packaged, and you have to buy them again. And then you have to basically give them to the people that can actually have the equipment to spray the fields. So it then becomes even more expensive. And that's if you can get those, insecticides, for example. But if you can't get insecticides, then your crop dies and you have to expand even more and you have this difficulty. So it becomes so costly that there was a 20-year period where the book gave us an example of both Ghana and Nigeria, where one of them grew the crop or the produce double the amount, and the other one increased their production by 3. And the 20-year comparison showed that their profits had actually decreased. And that's because of the contracts they're in. And that's because they're not able to industrialize. And also, if they don't produce enough food for their growing population, then there's also propaganda that is going to the Africans saying you have to worry about feeding your people first, then industrialize. And Kwame in the book is telling us, well, you can't feed your people if you don't industrialize. And we can't industrialize if you don't let us with these fucking contracts that you've given us. So it's this cycle, this trap that they're in. Yeah. Why did I go into that tangent? Don't know. All right, let's continue to read. We skipped a little bit because they're going into a lot of details that we do not need to get our lessons. Let's see what we learn here. Sundry other interests make Rhodesian Anglo-American and leading controller of Zambia's economic life, finance, and investment are included by, among others, 20% of Rhodesian Acceptance LC. Okay, we're getting more details on different companies. They are owning cement and clay. Yeah. So another thing that we know is that they also own the industry, right? So they owned the production. The production means to create roads, buildings, schools, any infrastructure at all. So then you still have to pay them to build and do the things. And a lot of this stuff is written into contracts. And it's usually something to do with like aid. Like we will give you food for your people or whatever. But you have to contract us to do this other thing for you. And so right now, even today, a lot of these capitalistic countries basically run these countries. They provide them the internet, they provide them the technology, they provide them the infrastructure, they provide them the education, the schools. So they're being propagandized as much as we are. They're basically owning all of their raw materials. And so Kwame tells us in the book that the only way for Africa to get out of these traps is to trade within each other and use their own currency and their own banks so that they don't have to still basically ignore the contracts that you already have with the West, because they're all exploitative anyways. And in this book, we learned that it's all exploitative, and Africa is basically just seen as a quick profit, quick buck, easy to expand, etc., etc. All right, so we're going to skip a lot of this details. Let's go to here. These tightly braided interests, which we know is what they just went into details about, because the only reason that I'm skipping is because he has done this quite often in this book. He goes into the details of ownership percentages, and he tells us everything about these companies. And honestly, because so much time has passed, I don't think is that effective to us, and I don't think we will remember. So I skipped some of that to see what meat and potatoes we can get from the reading. These tightly braided interests are of special concern to the people of Zambia and Rhodesia, whose existence and fate they dominate. Not for nothing is Mr. Harry Oppenheimer enlarging his own personal stake through the proposals concerning the share exchange between Anglo-American and British South Africa Company in New Rhodesia Investments, a tributary of British South African tributary Cecile Holdings, that Cecile holds, Cecile holds. Cecile Rhodes, by the arrangements, British South Africa will have wider share in Anglo-Americans' activities through the establishment of the local Rhodesian board for the chartered company under the chairmanship of Sir Frederick Crawford. So we have some, the British basically controlling, the British and Americans controlling these countries. This is the book is going into some of the early ways that this took place, which honestly is not very different. The only thing that has changed, really, yes, there's been a little bit of development that has happened. Some countries have been able to pay off these horrific predatory loans that they took on when they first became independent and were literally having to feed their people without having anything to feed them from. So they had to get started. So some of them, and those loans, by the way, they would take out those loans. They would grow with years' interest. The companies, the conglomerate, the cartels, syndicates of banks from different European countries that would lend together. They would lend this money to this. They would make so much money, and the loan would be 10 times, 100 times, whatever. They would be so much higher. They would have to take out another loan to pay off that loan. And there's an example in the notes. Again, you can find the notes in the Discord. You can see it in the channel description. But in the notes, you would see that there's an example like that where they take out 3 loans. And even the last loan, they were only able to pay off half of it. And then they had to sell some of their territory, some of their land. And then also they had to give away to the last lender to finally not have that loan, their rubber, basically territory where it was Firestone. So Firestone, basically, that they basically are and still are today what they are because they were also in it on the exploitation business. Literally every single one of these big companies that has been in business for 40 plus years, you can just you don't have to really guess. Their wealth came from exploitation. And if it was in that specific company, then it was the one that started that company because their companies came from exploitation. It is that deep. And so it is not a surprise. This whole capitalistic system, it is a fraud. It is fake. It is propaganda. It is a message. And every now and then you have some of us that win the lottery and are able to get out of the system and become rich because they have to give lotteries every now and then. It's like the Hunger Games, or there was another show like that. They have to give these lotteries so that people can keep, you can kind of keep them quiet. But at the end of the day, it is a scam. And most of these companies basically got their riches from exploitation. So being the first to exploit, being the first to take, being the first to be part of the group that kills and removes. So that is what we're learning here. That is what we have read up to this point. I recommend you, if you're not going to read this book, again, it gets quite dense. Definitely go and get those notes from our Discord. All right, I'll just continue to read and see what else we learn here. Sir Frederick Crawford is at present the company's resident director in Rhodesia. As a former governor of Uganda, he brought with him his pro-consular experience in the ruling of natives. I wonder what the fuck that means. Uganda also provides as local director in Zambia, CPS Allen, until recently permanent Under Secretary of State to its Prime Minister. Thus are imperialist agents rewarded for their services to their real masters. Opposition to the establishment of the local board was met by British South African Company's president, P.V. Emrys Evans, with the explanation that it will provide a greater degree of autonomy for local management and will strengthen the company's representation in Zambia. Mr. Emrys Evans is himself a director of the Anglo-American Corporation, as well as a Rio Tinto Zinc Corporation Ltd. Mr. Emrys Evans carries the interests of Barclays Bank, DCO, by his directorship of the bank and his solicitude for Rhodesia development is implicit in his seat on the board of Rhodesia Railroad Trust. So you see, even the politicians now then have relationships with these companies, and they sit on the board of several of these companies. They control some, they have ownership, etc., etc. And obviously, the implication here is that they're also not treating very well the local population. Okay, I'll skip something here. His further connection with Oppenheimer's far-flung empire is confirmed by his membership of the London Committee of Rand Selection Corporation. So we have Rand, we have Rhodes, we have Oppenheimer. These are the big names. And if you have a relationship with them, you have a relationship with basically every single resource in Africa. You have a door in, and also, honestly, you're just doing their bidding. Harry Oppenheimer, LFA, D. Engler. So there's also this Erlanger, and another former proconsul, Viscount Malvern, who brings with him the blessings of the Merchant Bank of Central Africa, Scottish Rhodesian Finance, and the Standard Bank of South Africa. Like I said, all of the banks, all of the capitalist companies, all of the infrastructure companies, all of the transport and ancillary companies, all of the mineral companies, they're all in bed together. They all do each other's biddings. There's no competition. Whenever there is a newcomer, just like the American oil tycoon that, what is Charles, whatever, we just read about him, they basically go and buy him out. And if they don't buy him out, they buy a high percentage of their businesses so that they can have control over. And if they can't do that, then they wait till they are in bad shape and they buy them then. So, I mean, it's just always just kind of eating each other out. They do have another tactic where they get competitions, and when the competition is trying to expand and they put shares out, then they go in and buy as much shares. They buy them from, if there's like limitations for how many a certain company can buy or a certain person they can buy. They have so many different companies, so many different holding companies that they just have a bunch of them go and buy in until they have a greater than 51%. They control the company. They put it on a different path so that they're not competing anymore, whatever that path is. And then they sell it. If they don't want the company, then they just sell it and just, make a profit, and then it's not a competition anymore. So that's another strategy they have. They have quite a bit of these very malicious ways. A good deal of Mr. Emrys Evans' in 1962 annual report to the shareholders was devoted to what is described as ill-informed criticism of the group's alleged policy of removing large sums of money from the country while being unwilling to invest in its development. Okay, look at that. Somebody trying to defend it. Let's see what happens. The attempt to rebut this criticism by the affiliation that over 10 years the company had invested over $10 million in the territory, an average of over $1 million a year, would not convince Rhodesian Africans, who were well aware that the company received in gross income from Tit's Northern Rhodesian copper royalties alone in the year 1961-1962, the sum of 10.9 million euros. Taxation goes to the United Kingdom. I'm sure that this is something that still happens today. And the South Africa as also, And South Africa as also due dividends, which for the year 1959-60 absorbed 4 million out of the consolidated net profit of 8 million, arrived at after writing off almost 1 million for depreciation of investment and over 5 million for taxation. Rose originally links with the Rand and Kimberley mines have been knit more closely together by the thousand strands with Rhodesia and Zambia than it was possible for him to envisage at the time, though it was his overriding hope and ambition. This interwoven fabric partly provides the hangman's rope that is trying to strangle African independence and the political unification of Africa. Okay, so that was a little tough to read at the end, but yeah, so basically, we have some people that are trying to defend and closely associated with the governments. Every now and then you have them, and then they would come with their sob stories. Whenever they are, you take away some land from them, then they do a little, pity party, and you have to pay them for loss of opportunity. You can't do business with their competitors. You have to do business with their associates. Their associates end up being also them because they own their associates or shares of their associates or sit on the board of their associates' businesses, which do their bidding. So at the end of the day, you can't really, there's nothing that you can do that would make them happy except for give them all of your shit. Give them all of your shit. Okay, we're done with that chapter. Okay. Normally we would do a 2-hour reading. Today we're going to keep it at 1 hour. And we'll continue since we already went ahead and finished that chapter. We'll continue to the next chapter tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening, and